Now it's time to introduce financial instruments and talk in more detail about one specific type of financial instruments. Of course, I mean securities. As a whole, a financial instrument can be identified as a real or virtual document which represents a legal agreement which involves some sort of monetary value and can be easily traded as a package of capital. Here in this definition, I would like to highlight 4 important words. The first important word is an agreement. All financial instruments have contract nature, which means that any kind of a financial instrument is at the same time someone's asset and someone's liability. And those instruments have their value even though they are not physical commodities or some services themselves, which means that these are the rights which have the value, not the instruments themselves. And of course, another important feature of these financial instruments is tradability. By trading various types of financial instruments, we always trade the associated rights. And of course, this is generally done for the redistribution of capital resources. Here are the types of financial instruments which correspond to the above definitions. Those are securities such as stocks, bonds, bills of exchange, etc., derivatives like futures, options, swaps, and so on, foreign exchange, bank loans and deposits, as well as insurance products. In our course, we will focus on all of those financial instruments to see how specific they are and what makes the difference between them. In general, all the financial instruments have the following economic life cycle. As we have mentioned before, any kind of a financial instrument is someone's liability. When the instrument is issued first, this is the liability which is introduced. Then afterwards, as those instruments change hands and change ownership, this type of economic life cycle is called trading. However, I need to note that some financial instruments have limitations for trading or cannot be traded at all, thus still being financial instruments. Finally, sooner or later, those liabilities represented by those financial instruments terminate, which is called maturity of the financial instruments. Most of financial instruments have such maturities. However, some financial instruments like stocks have no maturity date. Depending on the stage of the economic life cycle, we can distinguish between primary and secondary financial market. The primary market is the market where transactions are made at initial offering or at introduction of the financial instruments. However, the secondary market is the market for all the transactions following the initial offering. Now I think it's time to define what a security is, which is one of the most popular types of financial instruments. If we take the formal definition, for example, from the Civil Code of the Russian Federation, translated, we can say that a security is a title of material rights which can be executed or transferred only by its legal owner, which is a very good definition from the point of view of the civil law. However, an international definition based on the common law can be formulated as the following. A security can be thought of as a fungible, negotiable financial instrument that represents an ownership position in a publicly traded corporation, a creditor relationship with government body, or a corporation. Here we can see that these definitions simply covers 3 important types of financial instruments like stocks, corporate, and government bonds. I would like to say that from the legal point of view, a security can be treated both as a document or as an object. As a document, ownership of a security equals ownership of some rights, which can be transferred by trading these documents. And in this respect, a security can be treated as an object, and all the transactions which can be done with physical goods, right, buying or selling, lending and borrowing, gifting, inheriting, are also applicable for the securities. From the economic point of view, a security is always a form of credit relations between economic agents, because, as I said before, this is the right represented by security which makes the security's value. And depending on what the security substitutes, we can distinguish between the three economic types of securities. A security may be the substitutions of goods. Those securities are bills of exchange, warehouse certificates, and some others. They are not frequently used in the modern market economy. However, there is a specific market for such securities. In this case, the transfer of ownership of a security immediately means the transfer of ownership of the underlying goods. Another type of a security is cash substitutes. In this case, we can think about checks, promissory notes, and the bills of exchange. Indeed, such kind of securities can be used like money and instead of money, and in this case, we can use checks like cash. Again, the markets for such securities, even being more liquid, are not such popular nowadays, while most of the securities currently traded refer to the category of investment securities, which is the substitution of capital. And here we can think about equities, bonds, and mutual funds as the most common examples of those securities referring to the investment category. Securities may exist either in physical or in electronic form, depending on whether the paper certificate of a security is issued or not. I believe it's needless to say that most of the modern securities are issued in electronic form without any paper certificate. However, in some countries and in some markets, physical certificates still exist, even though they do not change hands and are kept in custody. Sometimes, legally, still the certificates are issued. However, in most markets, the trading of securities is organized in the way that does not need to exchange the paper certificates of securities. Depending on who issued the securities, we can distinguish between government, municipal, corporate, and even private securities. Thus, federal or regional authorities, municipal authorities, companies, or individuals being those who are obliged by issuing those securities. We can also classify the securities issued by the same authority by the priority of payments. And in this case, some securities can be called major securities and others may be called minor securities. For example, if we classify the securities issued by the same company, that will be the collateralized bonds on top, then go uncollateralized bonds, then go the preferred stocks, and then go the ordinary stocks. The underlying reason is that you fulfill your liabilities corresponding to a certain type of securities only if senior securities obligations are fulfilled. We can classify all the securities available in the market by investors' objectives. I believe it's an open secret that some securities are purchased for investment reasons. However, another part of securities is traded as speculative instruments. So what makes the difference? Generally, while talking about investment class securities, we mean the securities with high credit rating, which are generally held for long periods of time relative to other securities. And generally, those who invest in the securities of investment class prefer to receive their gains in form of regular payments, such as dividends or interest payments, and they do not focus too much on the pricing movements. On the contrary, those who invest in speculative securities generally hold their position for shorter periods of time, and they are not very much interested in getting the regular income. They are mostly focused on the changes of the securities price. As soon as the price changes, they prefer to close their position in order to avoid risks. By the way, let's talk a bit about the risks associated in investing in securities. We can distinguish between two general types of risks. The first type of risk is called a systemic risk, which can be described as the risk that refers to the stock market as a whole. This risk cannot be diversified or reduced or eliminated in any other way. The only way to escape those risks is not to invest. And we can see that different markets and different countries vary by the level of systemic risk. However, on the contrary, each security contains a part of a non-systemic risk, which is specific for this security and this company. And this is the type of risk which can be reduced by diversification. However, the limits to diversification lie where the systemic risk lies. You cannot diversify your risk more than the systemic risk. In the Theory of Finance course, we will talk in more detail about those two risks, and we will introduce various pricing models which help us estimate both the general risk and distinguish between systemic and non-systemic risk in investing in securities.